Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kirkpatrick Podcast, and we are back with the March Madness Back to Basics series. Say that 10 times fast. I also have my coffee, so maybe that's what is making me all jittery this morning. So today we are going to talk about level 2 learning, and I think that from an instructional design perspective, level 2, it kind of feels a little basic, if you will. Meaning, I had to think kind of hard. What's the basic, how are we getting back to the basics when it comes to level 2? And what I think that we struggle with is, how are we going to measure actual learning? And what's the best solution in order to do that? And measure, and do we have, and this idea that you have to have a pre and a post test, and that's the way to measure learning. And so today's episode is really all about being anti pre and post test. And the reason I am anti pre and post test is because I don't believe that we administer tests or knowledge checks or any sort of, application of knowledge understanding well. So I have gotten requests in the past from customers. They've said, I've provided them with a knowledge check, and I've provided them with, questions that actually had to made the learner think a little bit. And the customer will say, can we make these questions easier to answer? And I'm not, it wasn't developing training on rocket science, to be clear. The answers to the questions, or the selections, were realistic choices that people make. And the request to make them easier to answer just absolutely goes against everything that we're trying to accomplish with the module. And so I had to push back a little bit. And at the end of the day, right, there's only so many battles that we're going to pick, and so many times we're going to push back. But we had to really have the conversation of what is the purpose of this training, right? And I wasn't brought in from the beginning when it comes to doing the needs analysis and all of that. It was an organization which I was on the production line, if you will. So I didn't have that interaction, but we devalue the competence of our learners, right? We kind of just think we kind of need to toss them bones so they're able to say, pass the test and get their 80% and move on. And it's then we complain about behavior change, but we didn't even properly test their knowledge or give them this skill practice in order to, change their behavior. And so I just think we do just such a disservice when we check the box when it comes to a level 2 learning assessment. And part of that comes from the pre and the post test. If you test knowledge beforehand and then immediately after the test is, I've got 2 issues with it. One, if the test is not actually well written, well done, if we're giving them easy ways to make it seem that knowledge increased, then yeah, sure. Knowledge increased. Great. The other challenge I have with pre and post tests is that it feels like, do you remember cramming for tests in college and in high school, the night before? Did you actually learn any of that information? No, I just learned it long enough to be able to memorize it for the test the next day. And it left my brain as quickly as it went in. And so that's essentially what we're doing with a lot of our pre and post tests if we're not spacing them properly. And we're not providing that adequate knowledge retention time to really understand, did they actually learn something? And are they retaining what it is that they learned? So yeah, pre and post test, not my favorite thing, not my jam. And I think we have a lot of opportunity there. One other thing I wanted to bring to everyone's kind of the conversation and the thought around pre and post tests is how we structure the pre and post tests. Meaning, a lot of organizations rely on traditional tests, like multiple choice test, fill in the blank, like all of those traditional, like what we took in school, right? But when we think about what the actual end goal is, and that is to change behavior, then a test on skills and behaviors that are multiple choice and text-based, it just doesn't land the same. I can deduce from the 4 options what is, the best option or what's likely the right answer, right? But I'm not actually seeing you in the performance environment to be able to say, we need to give you some additional support. So I implore you to think outside of the box and look at other ways to do multiple choice, or other ways to do testing other than multiple choice. So maybe it's a role play, that there's a rubric and there's an observer that has the rubric, and they, are assessing skill based on what they're observing, right? Or there's a case study that needs to be applied. But when we create these quizzes and tests that remind us of taking a test in school, that's not real life. From a policy perspective, yeah, I can see how those are helpful, right? Or like following the procedure. Sure. Maybe not procedure, but like a policy. But like if I want to know if someone has the skills to be a better interviewer as a hiring manager, I can give them a bunch of scenarios and questions, sure. But is that passing score at the end, or whatever score they get, let's say they fail, is that enough to tell you whether or not you're going to actually transfer that learning to behavior? Or is it just the fact that the learning was like fresh on their mind? And I know that a lot of people can BS their way through understanding a concept and knowing it, but actually putting it into practice, totally different. So actually what's funny is, so last night I was writing one of the chapters in the next Kirkpatrick book, and I was calling back to leadership development and what makes a good leadership development program and how do we assess them and all of that. And the thing is, like, what do we learn? What do we typically learn in leadership development programs, right? It's like, how to be an empathetic leader, how to build trust on a team and all of that. Things that are hard to measure with a basic test, right? Like a multiple choice, fill in the blank and all of that. Like, I can read a scenario and give you steps and all of that, right? I can give you my advice, but the real like feet to the fire, do I know that you learned something, is if I actually can put you in a situation where, let's say I'm the facilitator and we go through a scenario where, I give you I'm, not meeting my standards and you're my manager and you need to have a conversation with me about putting me on a performance plan. Like, that's a real thing, right? And maybe in the leadership development program, you learned, a model for having these conversations, right? So you want to see the participant apply that model in the conversation. That is a better test. That is a better assessment of skills and knowledge. Not this, Vanessa is not performing well. Out of options A, B, C, or D, what option would you do, right? What option would you take? I'm going to say this, which sounds very contrary to everything that I've just been saying. So sorry about this, friends. I know that there is a great tool out there called scenario-based learning that can be very helpful in these situations. And I love them and I recommend them often. And if we're going to bring it back to like the basics and like, really the whole goal of this series is to get you to take one step, to make one move towards applying the model better and more accurately. And part of that charge when it comes to level 2 is rethinking how we're doing testing. And if the first step that you can take is a scenario-based question, take that step. So don't hear me say like, don't do any of these tests, right? Hear me say this. I want you to take one small step today. And if that step is changing to a scenario-based question, great. As opposed to like, BS multiple choice questions, great. And there are so many opportunities with scenario-based questions to do things a little bit differently. For example, not just providing the right answer at the end, and walking folks through a branched scenario. It doesn't have to be super long, it doesn't like, because some of these scenarios can really go down paths. But have them walk through and make choices based on the conversation they're having in front of them. That to me is a better test than, just like a multiple choice question, then moving on to like the next concept you want to assess. And what I love about this like branching option is that there's an opportunity, like it feels like a choose your own adventure, if you will, because the participants constantly making these choices in this conversation that are a little bit reflective, could be reflective of real life, have done well. And I think that we've got so many tools now when it comes to creating scenario-based learning and things like that. And at least mapping it out. Like I would say that's probably like, that was like my first like hiccup, was how do I map all of these different, branches out, right? Like trying to do it in PowerPoint or, in Word was just not it. And so there's a tool out there called Twine, and there's other things that you can use. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent on that, but I want to just say that I sound like I'm dogging scenario-based questions, I realize, and I'm not. I think that they're excellent. I also think the ultimate goal is for me to really see if you're able to transfer those skills. The best way to do that, like number one, is to actually get an observation done, and really try to put you in that environment. And because it's less controlled, and me as the facilitator, I can, a well-versed facilitator can kind of adjust the scripting and their mannerisms and kind of take things in different spins to really prompt a real life scenario for the participant. So I think if you're going to make a move on level 2 learning, it's to ditch the pre and post tests that don't actually test knowledge, and give you vanity metrics. And we're going to talk more about vanity metrics in level 1 reaction. Here I am messing up the model in level 1 reaction. But beside completion rate, I also think that pre and post test scores can be considered vanity metrics if the tests are not done well. I said it. Sorry. And we've got to start to be comfortable with numbers that don't make us look good on paper. Because if I get low pre and post scores, that for me is actually opportunity, as opposed to, we don't have great training, or we don't have great employees that are, I can understand these concepts, right? It's actually I think it's thrilling when things are not hitting the mark like we hoped they did, because it gives us an opportunity to really think about, okay, where did we miss the mark when it comes to the needs analysis and the root cause analysis? And how can I improve the program so that people are assessing behavior? You know what's funny? Okay, I'm really going to go a little bit, tell you something very deep. So I had a therapist tell me once that I need to start messing things up in my life, because I'm so highly functional as a human that people just assume, oh, Vanessa's got it. She's not going to let that one slip. She never lets anything slip. How could that slip? And so she's like, you should just do little things. She's like, mess up laundry, put a red shirt in the whites or something like that. She's like, there was a study done where a woman did this, and eventually, her family started saying oh, maybe mom actually needs help. And they started taking on more things. And I think that the disservice we do, so the parallel I'm drawing here, sorry, everyone. The parallel I'm drawing here is that I think that the disservice that we do is we give our CEOs these vanity metrics of oh, got 95% of the participants love this training. Knowledge was at, they scored a 60 before the test or before the course, and now they're at an 85 after the course. Look how much they grew through the training program. But did they? Right? So it looks so this is what you're reporting on to your stakeholders. Well, of course they're going to think that things are fine. You're giving me good numbers. You're giving me good information. But we know we're not actually meeting the mark, and we know that we need help, right? We need support. We need new ways of doing learning, and we need buy-in to encourage people to make learning part of their day, and all of these things, right? But what we provide to our stakeholders looks really good on paper. It's why am I going to change anything? You're telling me that you're able to increase. I don't see that necessarily in the performance. We haven't dug into that yet. And I feel we need to be realistic about pre and post, right? And show oh, actually the training didn't work. And then when you can dig into why, you can say, wow, we missed the mark because we weren't able to do the needs analysis because you wouldn't give us access to the participants. We missed the mark because we were constrained by doing an instructor-led training, when really what people needed was, this. So it's a way to mess things up and to take a page from my therapist's book, if you will. A way to mess things up to get to where we want to be as an industry. And I encourage you to slightly mess things up, nothing that we're going to break any system or anything like that, but in a way to like stop overperforming to hide the fact that things are not working. I know that's scary. Trust me, I get it. You know, there is certainly a concern for your job and things like that. But I think that there's opportunity to sit here and say, hey, like the way that we're doing things isn't working. And it's a culture problem. It's a performance environment problem. It's like, it's not the training necessarily. It is everything else in the environment, or it's the fact that you're not letting us actually do our jobs when it comes to learning, and you're making things really easy because you're making it all compliance based. Like, that's not really helping anybody. So with that, friends, I encourage you to mess things up just a little bit and stop being so high performing. And this is me looking at myself to remind myself to do the same. Because we could always use a little bit of help. Friends, I will catch you all next week, where we will end our Back to Basics series with Dr. Don Kirkpatrick's favorite level, level 1. Talk soon.